For years, the British public has heard the same promises. We will control immigration. We will secure our borders. We will restore confidence in the system. Yet somehow, every few years, another route appears. Another scheme, another pathway, another promise that this time things will be different. Now, under Home Secretary Shabana Mahmood, Labour is preparing to introduce new refugee sponsorship routes into Britain. And before anyone says, oh, this is just a proposal, let's be clear. This is already moving through Parliament. Applications for the new sponsorship schemes are expected to open this autumn. The first refugees are expected to begin arriving in 2027, next year. This is not some distant theory. This is government policy, and it is happening. This autumn, charities, community groups, universities, and approved organizations will be able to apply to sponsor refugees identified through the UN refugee system. Next year, employers and businesses will be able to sponsor refugees themselves. Think about that for a moment. Community sponsorship, charity sponsorship, university sponsorship, employer sponsorship. These are not routes being closed. These are routes being opened. And that is why many people feel they are being told one thing while watching something else completely happen. Because you cannot repeatedly talk about reducing pressure on the system while simultaneously creating new pathways into it. Apparently, this is what getting tough looks like. The same way adding lanes to a motorway reduces traffic, or closing more checkout tills is more efficient, or turning on another tap empties an overflowing bath. The British public is expected to nod along and pretend that this makes perfect sense. Meanwhile, there is another question politicians seem desperate to avoid. Where exactly are these refugees likely to come from? Countries that have already been mentioned include Afghanistan, Sudan, and Eritrea. Now let's be honest. This is not a conversation Westminster likes having, but ordinary people like you and me are already having it. Because immigration is not just about numbers. It's about integration. It's about culture. It's about values. It's about whether a country can remain cohesive when large numbers of people arrive from societies with very different traditions, beliefs, and social norms. People should be judged as individuals. Nobody should be blamed for where they are born. But pretending there are no cultural differences between Britain and countries such as Afghanistan and Sudan is ridiculous. Britain is built on freedom of speech, freedom of religion, democracy, equality before the law, equal rights for women. These values did not appear by accident. They were fought for, defended, and sometimes paid for in blood. The question is not whether newcomers can embrace those values. Many do. The question is whether politicians are even willing to discuss the importance of those values. Because importing people is very easy. Integration is hard. Very hard. And yet, every time concerns about integration, social cohesion, or cultural compatibility are raised, they are dismissed as ignorance, prejudice, or fear. The public is allowed to discuss numbers, but not culture. Housing, but not values. Costs, but not integration. And then politicians act surprised when trust begins to erode. And then there is the ECHR, the big untouchable. Every time immigration is discussed, politicians promise stronger enforcement, faster removals, and greater control. Yet Labour remains fully committed to the European Convention on Human Rights. Last year, tens of thousands of immigration cases involved human rights arguments linked to the ECHR, particularly Article 8, the right to private and family life. People can support that, people can oppose it. That is a legitimate debate. But what is not legitimate is pretending there is no contradiction. How do you promise dramatically stronger border enforcement while remaining committed to a framework that is frequently used to challenge removals? How do you promise tougher action while ruling out leaving the very convention that critics argue makes that tougher action harder to achieve? Perhaps Shabana Mahmood has discovered a revolutionary form of mathematics, one where you remove more people by making removals harder, one where you tighten the system by opening new routes, one where you reduce immigration by expanding immigration pathways. If so, she should publish it immediately, because it would rewrite everything we know about numbers. And this is the problem. We are not stupid. We can see the gap between the rhetoric and the reality. We can see politicians talking about control while expanding sponsorship schemes. We can see politicians talking about enforcement while remaining tied to legal frameworks that make enforcement more difficult. We can see politicians talking about public concern while ignoring what millions of people have been saying for years. We see small boats continue to arrive. We see asylum claims taking years. We see hotels still being used. We see housing shortages worsening. We see public services under pressure. And now we see the new refugee sponsorship routes being created. Community routes, university routes, employer routes, refugee routes, with applications opening this autumn and arrivals expected from next year. Yet, we are told all of this amounts to greater control. At what point does the public stop believing the slogans? This debate is not about lacking compassion. Britain has always helped people fleeing genuine persecution and conflict. Most people support that. This debate is about honesty. If the plan is more refugee resettlement, say so. If the plan is more sponsorship routes, say so. If the plan is more community sponsorship, more university sponsorship, more employer sponsorship, and more refugee sponsorship, say so. If the plan is to remain fully committed to the ECHR, say so. But stop calling expansion control. Because words matter. And if opening more routes is now considered border control, then perhaps bankruptcy is wealth, failure is actually success, and pouring petrol on a fire is a recognized firefighting technique. We, the British people, deserve better than slogans. We deserve honesty. And right now, honesty appears to be in desperately short supply.